Okay, thank you guys for joining me this afternoon. I see a lot of familiar faces, so that's nice. So my name is Tom Ulanowski. I'm the quality assurance person for Canna Farms. We're a licensed producer in Hope. And what I'm going to be talking to you about this evening is some very interesting data that was given to me by Strainprint. They're a mobile cannabis tracking app. And we're going to be looking at what this data shows as far as the ACMPR landscape is concerned, different products that people are using, and more importantly, what effects people are seeing from these. So I know this title is a little much, and there's a word stats in there, so many of you have a glazed over look, and I don't know if that's because it's 420 or because you're not into statistics, but these are very simple stats. We're going to be analyzing this on a very high level, if you will, and I'll try to walk you through this as best I can. So before we begin, again, I'm a quality assurance person at Canna Farms. We're BC's first licensed producer, and perhaps more importantly, we're independent, family owned and operated. We're probably the only private LP in Canada at this point, which we're very proud of. We've done a great job, and we have a lot of great reviews and great clients that support us. My background is in science and environmental chemistry, and that's the way I'll be speaking to you today, through a scientific lens. I've been in the industry for 3 years now, and I've had a lot of time to ponder about certain questions and certain things that people ask me, and I've come to realize that there's a big problem in cannabis. And the problem is this: we have a lot of anecdotes regarding the efficacy of certain cannabis types or strains, especially for certain symptoms. But this is an issue because there's actually no real high quality controlled studies that support a lot of these anecdotes. And although stories are nice, they're not data, right? And if we want to know something about this world, we need to study it scientifically. We need to be able to ask certain questions and use scientific methods to get certain answers. And so ultimately, this lack of data hinders acceptance of cannabis as a medicine by the medical community and the public in general. And what happens is patients suffer. Right? Without good data, we can't make informed decisions, and there's both misinformation and a lack of information. And so that's what we're going to try to do today. We're going to try to solve that. Obviously, we're not going to solve everything, but what we're going to do is look at how we can solve this solution, how we can solve this issue. So, in most scientific studies, when you're approaching a new subject, you want to be able to ask some questions. And you do that by collecting a lot of information about a specific issue or problem, and you analyze that data, and you look for certain trends or patterns in that data that you can then use to inform your opinion and ask certain specific questions in a very controlled way. That's just how science works, right? And so this is what we're going to do today as a group. We're obviously not going to spend too much time on it. We have about 20 minutes. But ultimately, we're going to go through some very interesting current data and try to see if we can pick anything out. And who this will benefit, ultimately, if we keep doing this as a society, is we're going to have a better understanding of cannabis as a medicine and how it affects different people. We're going to have an improved knowledge of product formulations, which is key within a legalized market, and ultimately it's going to allow our patients, people using cannabis, to do so in a more informed fashion. And besides all that, this is great information for marketers as well, so we can look at this from a variety of different ways. So this data was given to me by Strainprint. You might have heard that name before, even used the app. It's a mobile cannabis tracking app that runs on your Apple or Android device and allows people to basically track their sessions and how they respond to certain products or certain product types. The great thing about this app is it's standardized, right? So people go through a series of questions. It allows people to report that and ultimately review what works for them. So to date, Strainprint has tracked nearly 200,000 sessions. I've been told that they double almost every 2 months. So this is a relatively new app, but already they have some great traction. And users are rewarded for using this app, and they're allowed to redeem points at certain participating partners. So full disclosure, Canna Farms is a client of Strainprint. We offer our clients a branded app, which we can users or our clients can use this app to track their use, and they can redeem points at our online store. And there's anti-gaming features in place to prevent abuse of this system. So it's a great little app. I encourage you to check it out, give it a whirl. And so what we're presenting today is a lot of information. Now we have 20 minutes. We don't have time to do all of this, but this is sort of the scope of the data set, or at least my data set. So we have information about 25 different licensed producers, nearly 450 dried cannabis products, the cannabis type, we'll get into that a bit later, its chemistry as well, and how well it works out of 10. We're not going to focus on oils, but there's actually additional information about methods of ingestion and dosage, but again, that's outside the scope of this presentation. And we also have information about the effects and conditions that people are using. So a very rich data set which we can play with to pull out some interesting patterns. So with any good study or analysis, there are assumptions and limitations. They're listed here. Basically, overall, we're assuming that the information that we have is accurate, right? LPs have to report potency a certain way, and so we're assuming that that's accurate. There is inter-lab variability, but overall, I don't think that's a big issue in this regulated industry in Canada. Users have to be honest, which we're going to assume that they are because they're doing this for their own medical purposes, and that the LP-assigned sativa indica hybrid system is correct, whatever the heck that means, and we're going to get into that. Limitations, well, data is user submitted, so there's obviously some bias, especially because this data represents people who use cannabis and also use a tracking app. So a self-selected group, but nonetheless, I think you'll find it's quite representative. And overall, we're limiting it to dried cannabis. And this data is a reflection of not what LPs are producing or selling, but what people are actually using. So that's it. So without further ado, I think we can get into it. So again, this data set represents 2,100 individuals, 50-50 split between male and female. We have, in my data set, 30,000 track sessions, but there's actually, this is data from over 100,000 track sessions that's been condensed for various reasons. As you see, overall, we have slightly more females and males reporting, and on average, one person will report every 14 times. It goes up to 300 and as low as 1. 10 to 20 is what most people for now have been using. So this is a graph here showing cannabis oil use divided by age group in 5-year increments. And on the y-axis, we have the number of tracked sessions. Now I'm starting with cannabis oil, even though our talk's about dried cannabis, because I want to show you how even a very simple data set can reveal a lot of interesting stuff. So here we see that nearly 2/3 of all users fall between the 35 and 60-year-old age group, and it's mostly females that are using cannabis oil as medication, right? And when we compare that to dried cannabis, we see that that shifts over, right? So we have a much younger demographic, under 40, predominantly using dried cannabis, right? So 3/4 of all people, and the ratio between female and male users is actually a little tighter here. So that's quite interesting right away. When you're a producer and you're maybe marketing or developing products to a certain group, your dried cannabis products will probably be marketed towards a different group than your oils. And overall, this data is quite representative. So I took a look at a Stats Canada report from December, which basically shows that 75% of people under 30 or under 40 using cannabis. So pretty representative. These next few graphs are going to show you the different potency for different types of cannabis. So the analysis will be focused on 3 chemotypes: a high THC variety, a high CBD variety, and a mixed THC CBD variety. So you'll try to see that, and the colors have been kept consistent. And so you'll see here an average of the whole industry, and the average THC and CBD and potency for each type. So you see on average, people are using about 20% THC strains, right? Those error bars, the black error bars, represent the deviation around the mean, but on average, most people are after a high potency strain. You'll see that CBD offerings are a little lower at 16%, and the sample size is much lower. And that's a problem we'll get into in a second. And with the mixed variety, we have a 6 and 9% THC and CBD level, respectively. So overall, you can see THC strains are most productive. You can interpret it that way, followed by CBD and the mixed variety. When we switch gears and look at indica, sativa, and hybrid types, right? So these are 3 types of cannabis. that botanists have used to describe how a plant grows, looks, and potentially where it comes from. Now, for lack of a better word, these terms have been bastardized over the last 10 years to infer that they have certain effects. And we have some information to maybe support that. The idea is that these different types have different terpene levels, and those terpenes have different effects, and there's probably some truth to that, but we really don't have much information at this point about that. But you see here that there's really no difference between a sativa, an indica, and a hybrid in this data set as far as average potency. And those transparent graphs show you the average total terpene content of each strain. Again, no real difference. There's actually huge variability, which I'll show you on the next slide. But really, I always thought the sativas were just lower potency, and that's why people were seeing different effects. But we see here that this is really not the case. And keep in mind, there's no really way for a consumer to verify these. You're going off what the producer or the seller is selling, which is definitely a limitation. But nonetheless, we're assuming that's true. So this is a graph plotted of all the different samples I have, chemistry samples I have for THC versus total cannabinoids versus total terpenes. And although the data is quite fuzzy, which real-world data often is, you'll find that there's a moderate linear positive relationship amongst this data. So what does that mean? Well, we can interpret this a few ways, but overall it suggests that plant productivity drives both cannabinoid and terpenoid levels, right? So it's very rare for you to have a low potency plant, but have a high terpene content plant. And as a grower or as an extractor, I'd be after high potency strains if I want the chemistry or the molecules, because a 10% plant is really not going to have much in terms of chemistry, right? So again, there is variation around that line, but overall, this is quite a decent relationship, and I'm sure if we had more, if we ruled out interlab variability, it'd be an even tighter relationship. So we're going to go in, get a little more granular with this potency, and we're going to look at how different LPs are performing in the market. And so this is a graph showing you all 25 different LPs that I have data for. So interestingly enough, we have nearly 90 licenses in Canada, but only 25 are selling product over the last few months, okay? So a lot are still ramping up and haven't got that license. On the left in the blue, on the y-axis, you'll see number of tracked sessions. On the right in the yellow, you see number of dried cannabis products. You see there's quite a spectrum. You have LPs that are starting out that have 1, 2, 5 products. Tweed, huge company with multiple licenses, has upwards of 60 different products that we have in our database. You'll also notice that there are 3 major LPs that stick out here that have the most sessions in this data set. Canna Farms and Emblem, as well as Tweed. Now, again, full disclosure, Canna Farms and Emblem are clients of Strainprint, so we offer branded apps. So obviously, we encourage our users to use this app, and so we're going to have more users. But you can see that there's some very big companies with probably a lot of money for marketing, and there's very little traction here. And so, you'll actually see I drew an arbitrary line of 500 sessions or less. We're actually in the next few slides going to discount those LPs because that's a small sample size and that's really not representative, right? So we're going to sort of focus less on the data that we don't have good data for, and we're going to focus more on the ones we do. One other thing to note is CBD is. There's very low CBD diversity in cannabis, in the industry, compared to THC or other strains. So I just wanted to also show you that we can look at this data from different data sets and similar patterns emerge. So Lift gave me the opportunity to also compare some of their data, and from a different data set. So Lift offers a review a website where people can do a very similar but definitely not identical online tracking or online engagement. And you'll see again we have a few LPs that are very popular, the rest not so much, and the number of offerings is pretty much the same. And what I see from this graph, the top 3 LPs, Sydney Broken Coast, Canna Farms, and Tweed, and 2 of them are not like the other. In many respects, one's a very large company with a lot of representation and clientele, and the others have, obviously, they're doing something right, whether it's marketing or have an active clientele, but nonetheless, there's going to be differences, but these are quite staggering, seeing 2 different data sets showing basically the same thing. So here we have the landscape, the ACMPR landscape of all the LPs. The dark blue graphs represent LPs that have enough reviews where we can sort of infer certain things from. The transparent ones are ones that don't have a lot of information of, so we're going to focus less on them. I didn't want to be disingenuous and not include them, but we're not going to really focus on that. So you see an average potency across the board of 18% amongst the LPs. There's obviously some standard deviation around that mean, upwards of 20 to 22%. But really, for the vast majority of the LPs, we have a pretty even, consistent potency. So what does that say? Well, that pretty much says that most people want high THC strains, and that no one producer, for the most part, is doing any better than anyone else, as far as total track sessions are concerned. Now, I don't want to do anything other than speculate here because we don't have anything to go off, but the two greenhouse growers on this graph, even when you incorporate the standard deviation, can't break an arbitrary 20% limit. So again, is that just because they're growing different types of cannabis? Maybe their clients are not buying high potency strains. Maybe they're marketing something differently. I don't know, but perhaps that's something to look into, especially when you're considering production and productivity per square foot. Another thing that I did want to point out is the highest graph on here. It comes from Tilray at 21% THC. And again, pure speculation here, but to my knowledge, Tilray is the only LP that self-tests, right, potency. Most other LPs is a third-party lab. So whether or not there's something going on here or they're just doing a really good job growing, I don't know, but it's evident that perhaps self-testing is advantageous in this market. When we look at CBD levels, two things emerge. Number one, half the LPs only have a pure CBD offering, and that's an issue. And most of them only have one or two max as far as offerings. So that's why we don't really have good information. There's really no standard deviation if you offer one lot or two lots for sale at a time. The average is a little lower. We're seeing pretty much that they have the same potency across the board. The one thing is some shameless self-promotion. Canna Farms has had the highest CBD on the market for the last few months, so we're quite proud of that. But again, there's variability between crops as well, so we can't draw too many conclusions from that. Okay, so we're going to switch gears now. We've looked at potency, we've looked at different LPs. Now we're going to look at reported effects from cannabis, right? So Strainprint collects data on about 30 different effects. Here you see a word cloud showing you that most people are happy after using cannabis. Who would have thought? And that's good, that's nice. We want to see a positive response from something, and we don't want to see too much negativity from someone after they've consumed that. But we can break this down into three chemotypes and look at the difference in response between positive, neutral, and negative effects. And we see really that there is no difference across the chemotypes. Nearly 80% of people are reporting a positive response to cannabis, regardless of the chemistry. And most are having a pretty good time and not having too many negative effects, all right? Again, we can look at indica, sativa, and hybrid types. And really, not much difference to me. Yes, there's a little bit, but overall, people are overwhelmingly having a positive experience with cannabis, and this is great. Again, we can switch to another data set. Look at the exact same thing. Data from Lift, 35,000 reviews, showing that 80%, nearly on the dot, are having a positive experience. Really good news. It's nice to see two data sets complement each other. So now again, we have on the x-axis all the different effects that people report. On the y-axis, we have number of track sessions that reported for each effect, and we have all the graphs broken down to three chemotypes. Again, colors are pretty consistent across the board here. So a few things emerge. Number one, really, a lot of these effects, there is no difference between chemotypes. But when we look at the high THC peaks, we see that most people are having a positive response overwhelmingly to things like being creative, dreamy, aroused, giggly, happy. So that's quite nice to see. Obviously, the psychoactivity of THC drives a lot of these effects. We've known that, and higher potency strains will probably have more of an effect. When we look at high CBD and the peaks that emerge there, only two do, and that's energy and focus. That's how people feel after consuming a CBD variety. And again, there's not the same level of psychoactivity at all with CBD. So what this tells me is if someone wants to use cannabis for a certain condition during the day when they want to be focused and not maybe lethargic or couch locked, that's definitely a good choice. And the mixed varieties sort of fall somewhere in the middle, suggesting that THC is a major driving factor in all these effects. So now this is where it gets sort of very interesting here, and where we're going to have to ask a lot more questions than we can answer with this database, is we can look at the same analysis broken down by indica, sativa, and hybrid. And what really comes out is feelings of being couch-locked and dreamy are related to indicas, overwhelmingly, as compared to the others. For sativa, the 3 peaks correspond to feeling creative, energized, and focused. So what's going on here, right? These are essentially the same adjectives that you'll hear any dispensary bud tender or anyone, a cannabis educator, tell you that are going to result from consuming these strains. So is this a fact of the chemistry that's causing these effects, or are these preconceived notions that people have and are thus reporting them as such? And the hybrids sort of fall somewhere in the middle. And what we can conclude from this is that there's some correlation, but studies like this won't offer causation. So that's where a controlled scientific experiment could be done to really blind the people and say, you know what, you don't know what you're taking, but we still want to know how you feel. And from that, we can tease out if it's something that's psychosomatic or something that they might be thinking that they're feeling, or if it's an actual effect. And so we're almost done here. I know it's a lot of slides and 420 is long gone, but we're going to take a look at 2 more slides here. And that's looking at certain conditions and how people respond to certain conditions. So Strainprint tracks nearly 150 different conditions like anxiety, depression, fatigue that people can respond to in their app. And they just give a simple rating out of 10, right? So for example, if I'm experiencing back pain and it's a 6 out of 10 and I medicate, 20 minutes later, Strainprint pops up and says, hey, how you doing? I say, you know what, I'm feeling a little better. I'm going to say 3 out of 10. That's a 3-point enhancement or positive enhancement in my feeling, in my condition. So my efficacy would be 30%. That's how we're going to interpret these graphs. So the first thing you see, there's really no difference between chemotypes. We have overall an overwhelmingly positive response, about 30% efficacy across the board, but huge variability. Those black bars are nearly double. Some people experience a tremendous amount of well-being well-being after consuming, and some barely. The only reason I circled insomnia is this is the only one where the error bars fall below the 0%. So in fact, some people can't even consume cannabis and go to sleep, right? And that's across the board for the most part between all 3 chemotypes. But it seems that sativas the CBD and THC type strains are even worse for that. And finally, we can look at this exact same analysis, but using our indica sativa hybrid lens, and we can see that sativas are most effective for fatigue and least effective for insomnia. Again, what's going on? What's causing this to be seen? Is this what people are expecting to see, or is this what they're actually feeling? So, to conclude, we know that the LP market, despite what many people think, is quite diverse. In 3 years, 25 LPs have released nearly 700 different dried cannabis products, which is great. The only issue is people can't really swap between LPs to access them. But there's overall essentially no diversity in CBD. They're all pretty much 1 or 2 of the same varieties or strains. Overall, we can consider that the average THC in the market is around 20%. So anything above that would be a high THC strain. And we know from personal experience working as an LP that most people are driven by THC. They want higher THC products. And this is something that legalization could consider, or the committees responsible for legalization. They can see that the market demands this, and they could not put any potency restrictions on products. There's a correlation with cannabinoids and terpenoids cannabis, but really no difference between the indica, sativa, and hybrid types as far as general chemistry. And overall, I just want to caution you guys, whenever you hear those terms, to not take them so seriously, because there's a whole variety of different things that go into the pharmacology of cannabis, and how a plant looks or what color it is definitely not one of them. High THC strains are great for overall positive effects. High CBD strains, well, we know people like to use them during the day. We have this correlation with sativa, and we have to ask what the heck is going on, because we can't tease that out in the data, but nonetheless, very interesting to see. And overall, we see that most people have a very positive experience with cannabis, and that data like this, despite being user-generated, is very, very good at teasing out and helping us to understand what's going on today with cannabis and what kind of questions we can ask tomorrow. So to conclude, I just want to thank the team at Strainprint. They've been phenomenal at just giving me their data set and allowing me to do a full analysis. Lift for also sharing their data and giving me a platform to speak, and for Canna Farms for giving me the opportunity to work in this industry. So if we have any questions, I think we have about 5 minutes to do that. Thank you.